My name is Kayla, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Service Management Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. At this time, I would like to turn the call over to Ms. Christine Garner.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the CA Service Management Community Webcast. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join. I think we have some good information today on a new feature that I think everybody who's worked with Desk for a while can be, or CA Service Management can be excited about. I just want to go through a couple of things before I turn things over to our speaker today. For those of you who weren't on the last webcast, as you're aware, 12.9 of Service Desk and Service Catalog were released in December. If you haven't looked at the new features already, the webcast done for the CA Service Management 12.9 release is available on the user group site for viewing. In that session, they did go through a lot of the new features on 12.9. For those of us that have worked with the products for some time, or even those of you that are new, one thing they have is a new unified view in the CA open space. We actually are upgrading now the service management piece and starting to install the open space and upgrade our catalog to 12.9, and our users are extremely excited about it. So there's also been additional mobile apps that are available that, again, my users are extremely excited about. So it's a great marketing opportunity for your self-service and that type of thing if you upgrade to this and can kind of reinvent the user experience. So I recommend if you weren't at that webcast that you go out to the user site and pull that webcast up and just take a look at what's out there. On the idea area of the user group website, I had a meeting with some of the developers recently, and they love the information that they're getting. It's in order to help them out, it would be really good, sometimes they'll get feedback. It'd be nice to have a button to do A, but there's not specifics. So when you're putting things in the idea area of the user group site, the developers, A, I can tell you, are looking at it. But B, if you can put like why it would be beneficial, what's the use case in your area of why it would be helpful, that will really help them pinpoint down what they can do to assist, in improving the product. For those of you that don't know, CA World's been announced. The theme is Invent Tomorrow. It's going to be held at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino in Las Vegas again this year, and the current dates are November 9th through the 12th. So they do have a Twitter feed and all that, social media stuff that you can follow along if you want to keep current on updates. I haven't seen a call for speakers yet for CA World, but I would expect that would be coming. So for those of you, I know we have several user group members who do generally speak at the conference, or if you haven't done a presentation at the conference before and would like to, it might be good to start thinking about some topics that you think would be helpful and good to present. Because I would expect it won't be too long before that call goes out, because it does take them some time to do their selections. So for user group business, that's about all I had. Today, we're seeing a presentation on a new feature that was released with CA Service Management 12.9. It's the high availability option. Our presenter will be Terry Williams with CA, and he's a support delivery manager. So Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome everybody to this presentation on Service Desk Manager 12.9 Advanced Availability. Advanced Availability was announced, as Christine said, as one of the new features in Service Desk 12.9. It was highlighted in our previous webinar where we obviously discussed Advanced Availability along with the other new features. What we'd like to do in today's presentation is take a deeper dive into the advanced availability feature itself, particularly because I think it's important that we demonstrate to you how this feature can be used in your business in regards to your 24/7/365 needs for running a business critical system. Hence, that's why we've titled this today, It's About Uptime. We would encourage questions. During the presentation, the lines themselves are on mute. You are more than welcome to use the chat session. That is being monitored, and we will respond to as many of your questions as we roll through the presentation through the chat session. At the same time, or rather at the end, we will also be opening the lines for a live Q&A session. We're targeting this presentation on primarily service desk administrators, but having said that, this presentation, we believe, will be valuable to anybody that's using service desk on a regular basis. So for today, we have a number of people that have come together to provide this presentation. Myself, Terence Williams, I'm the Support Delivery Manager here at CA, responsible for ensuring that we have a level of support primarily for Service Desk Manager, and I will be more than ably assisted by a number of other people within the team, many of whom I'm sure you will have worked with. We have Alex Peretti, who's our Principal Support Engineer. We have Paul Cotramiglio, also a member of the Service Desk Support team, who is a Principal Support Engineer. We have Subhashni Madaluri, our Senior Support Engineer. John Israel, another Principal Support Engineer. And we have Raghu Raguraju, a Principal Support Engineer. So as you can see, we've gathered a very senior team for this presentation for everybody here. We will also be more than ably assisted by Christy Druzinski, known as Drew. Christy is our Principal Engineering Services Architect. She'll be actually helping in manning the Q&A session. So as you ask your questions, Drew will be one of those people helping to ensure that we provide the answers that you're looking for. The agenda for today is broadly broken into two parts. The first is an introduction to Service Desk 12.9 Advanced Availability, and there we'll be looking at some of the new terminology that we'll need to become familiar with. We'll look at the architecture for advanced availability in comparison to the standard primary, secondary architecture that I think we all know now. We'll be looking at the concept of what are called singletons. All of this will become clear as we move through the introduction. And then what we'll do is we'll move into a series of use cases where what we want to do is demonstrate to you the way in which advanced availability can assist to ensure Service Desk runs whilst various functions are completed, i.e. modifications, a rolling maintenance, and what can happen if you need to recover from an unplanned outage. So that's really the agenda for today. With that having been said, we'll move into the introduction to advanced availability, and at that point what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague Alex Peretti.
Thank you, Terry. So, okay, thank you. So I'm going to start off today's meeting by just going over a few slides. If you attended the January session related to the new features of Service Desk Manager 12.9, besides the mostly look familiar to you, but we're just going to go over them for the benefit of anybody who was not able to attend, and also just a refresher to let you know some basic information about advanced availability. So to start off, we're just going to show the typical conventional physical topology. This is basically the way many of your service desk environments are set up today. You have a primary service desk server, you might have a couple secondary servers, and the connecting to the database. You notice that the connection to the database is handled all through the primary server. So obviously, this kind of configuration works just fine. Even with Service Desk 12.9, you could continue to use a configuration like this. But it does present a problem, and the problem is that you have a single point of failure here. If the primary server were to go down, basically the whole Service Desk environment is unusable because of all the transactions from the database are handled through the primary server. Once the primary server is lost, the secondary servers aren't able to function any further. So this kind of presents a problem, and that's the problem advanced availability is trying to resolve. So this is an example of an advanced availability physical topology. So we have here, instead of the primary server, we have a background server. And instead of secondary servers, we have application servers. We have a couple here. In the picture, we only have 3. You could have as many as you want, as many as you need. There's no restricted limitation to the number of application servers. And also we have a standby server. And a standby server, we're going to talk about that in a bit, but standby servers could basically take the role of a background server. And you could have as many standby servers as you want as well. You're always going to have one background server at any given time, but you could have as many standby servers or as many application servers as you need. And one thing you may notice here is application servers are actually connecting directly to the database. So we have, lines here, here, here. They're all connecting directly to the database. So you're removing that single point of failure through the background server. So to kind of start things off, we're going to go over some terms here that you're going to hear over and over throughout this presentation. So we're going to kind of clear things up right at the beginning so you'll be able to understand the presentation going forward. First of all, we have the concept of the background server. And as I have kind of alluded to, the background server kind of takes the place of the primary server in the current conventional configuration. Background server is the core of the architecture, and it runs the singleton processes. We'll talk about singleton processes in detail in just a bit. Then you have a standby server, which is the warm replica of the background server. And we label this as the passive server as opposed to the active background. And the standby server, it's basically waiting to be able to take the place of the background server if there's a problem or if you're doing a rolling maintenance. We'll go over to those scenarios in the future in the presentation. You have application servers. Application servers take the place of secondary servers today, and they run the processes required to support users. So your end users, they'll be logging into the application servers directly. If you have web service applications, you're going to want those pointed at the application servers. Application servers are basically taking on the bulk of the session traffic so that the backgrounds could be left mostly alone to handle the singleton processes and kind of be on its own running around. Then you have the concept of failover. To failover is to promote a standby server and make it into a background server. And we'll give some examples of when you might want to fail over throughout the presentation. Next, quiesce, which is to bring an application server to a temporary inactive state. This is basically a way of bringing the application server down by alerting the end users that the application server is coming down. And we'll give more information on that as well going forward. And then singleton processes. Now, a singleton process is a process that there's only a single instance of it running in the deployment. And the singleton processes are always running on the background server, and we have a slide coming up in just a bit that gives a list of all the singleton processes, so you can hopefully understand that a little bit more. So here's another view at the typical configuration. So as I've already mentioned, the concept of secondary servers no longer exists. You now have the concept of the application servers. Primary servers has been replaced by a background standby server pair. And all servers have direct database access. So this, once again, this removes that single point of failure through the primary service desk server that exists in a conventional environment. If a user is logged into an application server and is in the middle of performing a task and the background server were to suddenly lose access, the user would still be able to continue with their task without major interruption, which is a major help. So the background server is in active control of the singleton processes. standby server mirrors the operations of the background server. It doesn't actually make any writes, but it's basically mirroring everything to ensure the caching is identical. And the application server, that's where the end users are going to be accessing and doing their work. And we kind of have a diagram here showing another view of a configuration with the users. You got users connecting to the application servers, and that's routing to the database. And then the background server, the users are not accessing the background server. It's kind of just handling the singleton processes. So we mentioned the singleton. We mentioned that over and over again. So this is kind of to clue you in on what the singleton processes are. I'm not going to go into detail on what each process does, but just kind of example here of all the stuff that is running solely on the background server. Just a couple of things of note. I'm just going to point out authentication. Authentication is still handled on the background server, and we'll discuss why that's important later. Knowledge searching and indexing, mail eater, a couple of other processes. I'm not going to go into the details here, but we do have a tech doc that was recently released, TEC 611567, that provides this same information, but this is just for your reference on the processes that are still running on the background server. So right now I'm going to get ready to hand over the presentation. We're going to discuss some use cases. I'm going to hand over the presentation now to a colleague of mine, Paul, who is going to go over the first part of the first use case today, modifications.
Thanks, Alex. So as Terry alluded to earlier, we've identified 3 common scenarios or use cases where we're going to demonstrate how advanced availability can be used in your environment in order to perform some regular routine maintenance within Service Desk. So the first use case we're going to talk about is modifications to Service Desk. And now when we talk about modifications, we're going to specifically talk about schema changes and form changes as well. So a little bit of background, right? So in advanced availability, in order to sync modifications across your architecture, there's a couple of prerequisites. One is we need to ensure that the ver control option is set to upgrade mode within Options Manager. So basically this is sort of the engine behind the scenes that's going to basically help us sync the modifications across the architecture. Secondly, we need to ensure that the server secondary custom ver file is created on the background server in the site mods directory. All the modifications of the components that we'd like to sync across the architecture are controlled within this file. If this file doesn't initially exist, we would just have to manually create it at that location. A couple of terms here. So obviously the objective is to manage and sync modifications across all the servers, right? So when we talk about syncing and version control, we introduce the terms of clients and servers. So specifically in an advanced availability configuration, when we talk about the clients, we're talking about the application and the standby servers. And when we talk about the server component, we're just talking about the background server. So let's go through a common scenario and talk about how this will look in regards to an advanced availability architecture. So in this example, what we've done is we've just added a field to the analyst detail request page, and now what we want to do is synchronize this change to this form across all the servers within our advanced availability architecture. So the first thing we would do is we would log into the background server. We would go to the NX root site mods directory and open up that server secondary custom.ver file. And again, if it doesn't exist, we would just simply create it in this location. Next is we need to add some code or some variables into this file that basically tells version control what to do. So just a point of information that all of this is documented in the 12.9 administration guide starting on page 542. So as you can see here by this on this simple example, we've added a header tag, so basically identify the component that we're talking about. So we just call this my detail CR HTMPL. The next tag is the directory. So basically, where does this file exist? So we just gave it the path to the site mods directory where the modified analyst form resides. We'll obviously have to give the file name for the form, and then a version code, right? So this is just for change management control purposes. So we've said this is version 2.0 and the date that the file was created. And then again, we have some other ones where the read-write for the modes here. And again, this is all documented in the administration guide. So now we sort of have everything set up. So now we can start about updating the client servers with the changes. So again, when we talk about the client servers, we're talking about the standby servers and the application servers. So first, we would simply restart all the standby servers. So of course, since the standby server is sort of that passive server that sort of sits in the background, there will be no effect to the end users. Next is we move on to the application servers. So what you would like to do if you have multiple application servers in place is you'd like to start with the one that's the least active. So the simplest way to determine which one is the least active application server is to use the PDM webstack command. So for those of you that have been around Service Desk Manager for a while, it would be familiar with the PDM webstack command. For those of you that are not, you can simply type the command PDM webstack --H, which will give you the help options on this command. Please note that the PDM webstack command does not capture any SOAP or RESTful Web Services sessions. So if you have a server that is primarily and heavily used for SOAP or web services, you need to take this into account. So what we would do is we would restart the least active application server, and then we would stop the other application servers. And this is where we go into that quiesce mode that Alex was referring to earlier. So we would use the PDM server control command to basically quiesce the application server. So the command, you're able to pass an interval, which is in seconds, as to how long the server waits before it is basically taken offline. So when that happens, is any users connected to that application server will get a pop-up indicating that the server that they're connected to has been scheduled for maintenance, and that it will be being made inactive in the amount of seconds that you specified. So then after we're stopped the application server, we would start it back up and then basically reintroduce it into the pool of application servers and make it available for use. And then again, we would just repeat those same steps for any other application servers that you have in your architecture. So at that point, what would happen is version control would have synchronized that detailed CR form across all of the servers in your environment. So before we actually go into a demo and actually see this in action, I'm just going to set the stage here in regards to what kind of environment we're going to be working with for all of our demos. So in our demo environment that we'll be showing you today, we have a single background server, also referred to as the BG. And you'll be able to tell that it's a background server because the desktop color will be sort of a browny orange color. Standby server, also referred to as the SB. We have a single standby server, and again, as Alex indicated, you can have as many standby servers as you wish, but for our purposes, we're just going to have one. And its background color will sort of be a mossy green. And then finally, our application servers. So in our demo environment, we have two, also referred to as AP, and the background color for the desktop will be sort of a teal blue. So sort of just to set the stage so you guys can understand what kind of environment that we'll be showing you in regards to the demos and make it easier for you guys to follow. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sebastian, who will be walking you through the first use case of modifications in advanced availability. Sebastian?
Thank you, Paul. All right, let me share out my system here quickly. So for this demo, I'd like to show you schema and web form changes. We'll create a simple table in our web form, and this will basically show you how the changes are promoted into an advanced availability environment. So I have a background server, standby, just to give you an idea, and an application one. So within the background server, I'm going to bring up the screen painter. And here, I'm going to add a table. And a few columns. Simple. Now, I'm going to save this. And put it into a test mode. While it's getting saved in test mode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom form and basically add 3 columns to that, simple text boxes, and reference them to the custom columns that I just created. So schema has been put into test mode. Close that, and let's go to the, let's go create the test form, or the custom form. So detailed template in my table. Right. And insert some text boxes here. Okay. One more. Let's name them properly. And the last. Okay, my form is done. I'm just going to quickly save it. Now, I'm going to save it into a default form group. You have a choice to put it into any custom form group that you have in your environment. For this test, for this demo purposes, I'm just choosing a default. Okay. And now I'm going to do a publish. Okay, let's go back to the schema and publish that as well. Okay, as you can see in this publish, to complete publishing, we do need to run the PDM publish. In an advanced availability environment, we want to make sure all the servers are running. So I'll show you a process you need to follow in order for you to promote the customizations to the other servers without the servers being down. All right, let's log into the standby server. And here, I'm going to issue a PDM server control command. Basically, what this command will do, it will take control of the background server. Okay, so it's performing a failover, and this will become a background server, standby server. Okay, now let's go back to the background server, and here we need to, my apologies, go back to the background server, and which is a standby now. I'm going to issue a status to see if the daemons are down. They're down. Now I'm going to issue the publish command. All right. While that's happening, just to talk a little bit about the PDM server control command. Basically, that's with the -B flag. It basically notifies the local standby server to become the background server. And when you run PDM publish, on the original background server, which is now a standby server, it's going to update the DBMS with the schema changes. While it's building the data dictionary, you'll see a prompt where it's a pretty cool, neat tool that we have, where it's going to ask you if you'd like to fail over automatically. And I am going to accept it and say yes to that. It'll come up soon. Okay, here's the prompt where it's saying that it will start the standby server and also perform a failover. And I'm going to say yes to that. Now, PDM server control command can be used on all the servers. You can see help on them, on different flags you can use in an administrator guide. The flag that I just showed you, which is -B, you have other options too. You can choose that, you can look at that in a command prompt. Just type in PDM server control -H, and it will give you different flags that you can choose. All right, just starting up the standby server, which was the original background server. So if the standby is not running, when you issue a -B command on a standby server, and if it's not running, the service will get started, but there will be no failover performed. It'll just start the service. But if you do want to perform a failover, you need to run the command one more time. So right now the failover is happening. Okay, done. Now we're going to go back to the background server, which was originally standby server, and we're going to start to the services. Okay. Now, PDM server, just while it's starting, PDM server B command does not affect the end user sessions. So any in-progress updates that are stored, they will be stored and delayed until a new background server comes online. In regards to schema changes, all the advanced availability servers should have their services running in order for the Web Screen Painter to publish. In other words, to publish Web Screen Painter updates in advanced availability environment, you need to have all the servers that are in the configuration running. If any of the server is not running, then Screen Painter will actually prompt the user with an error. So let's quickly look at the task manager. As it's starting up, yes, looking good. Okay. Now let me show you the tick feeding status here. See that the schema changes have come through, and also the web customization. Now let's talk about the application server. Due to time constraints, I'm only going to show you with one application server. In the application server, you can actually see that the web customization did come through. It got promoted. It's because of the version control. But for schema changes, as all the other servers, we do need to recycle services. So we'll use a method that Paul spoke about before, Paul and Alice spoke about before. The method is called QSing an application. So when you QS an application with a given interval, you can read about it more on the administrator guide. When you QS an application with a given interval, it will QS for that many seconds. You can QS it to, you can give it different flags as you want, but we'll learn a little bit more about that. Users can, what will happen is that I'll show you in the demo, users will get a prompt that the service is going to be shut down, and what they need to do is they need to log out and log back into an available application server. So let me log into this application. Okay, let me get my password right here. All right, so I'm logged into the web interface, and I'm now going to give a command, QS command, of 30 seconds. I'm not going to put the -S, which is a remote server, because I'm basically QSing the local server, just to give you an idea. So here, I gave a command of 30 seconds, and users might be working within their system, but then they get a pop-up right away. Basically, it will tell them that the service is being shut down, and if you give them the time. Because I gave it less than 60 seconds, it's basically saying now. So users would need to log out and log back into a available server. Okay, put that out. Let me bring up the services to see. I think it's still stopping. Okay. Now, so by QSing the when you give a QS command, end users are notified that the server is being shut down. It's a cleaner, a proper way than sending basically sending an emails to the user base saying that there will be a maintenance and the system will be down. Keep in mind, and the users will not automatically redirected to another application. They would be logged out and log in to the updated server to resume their work, unless you use a third-party control. Sorry about that, third-party load balancer in your SDM architecture. Now, QSing server does not allow new sessions to start. Let me just start up the service here quickly. Okay. The message that we saw when I did the QS for 30 seconds, that message can be customized if you'd like. Actually do that in a, there's a file called qs_pending.html. You can put your message as depending on your company. Okay, let's start at the service here. Once the service has been started, we can actually see the schema changes that would be promoted to the application servers. Once it's started, you can now follow the same QS procedure in all your application servers and promote the schema changes. Let's take a look. Okay, MySQL agents are coming up, all right. So now, service has been started. Let's go to the magic folder. There you go. My schema changes have come through, and the web form changes have come through because of the version control. Now that concludes my demo. Now I'd like to pass the baton over to my colleague, John Israel. Let me stop sharing and to learn a little bit more about maintenance and patching. Okay.
Thank you, Sebastian. Great job on that demo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to refer to going forward as rolling maintenance. And by that, we mean patching at the server test level as well as the OS level and database as well. So we'll jump right into it. The advantages of doing the rolling maintenance are that you don't need a complete outage. So the complete outages are really a thing of the past. SDM, or Service Test Manager, remains in a running and available state for the end users during the patching process, and the only exception there is when you have to apply an MDB patch, because in that case you'd have to bring the MDB down, and that would also require the other systems to go down as well. That will be a rarity. The users are able to continue to do their work without being affected by the application of patches to the Service Test servers. As a quick note here, when we say rolling maintenance, we refer to any change being made to the system, whether it's hardware, software, OS patches, options manager changes, service desk specific patches or fixes that you would use Apply PTF for. We have a document that's out there, the tech doc, which I've had the number up here, and that's tech 611947, and that explains which steps to use for which particular situation. So this diagram here is also located in the manuals, the product manuals as well. And this kind of gives really a high-level overview of the steps that you would take when you're going to perform rolling maintenance in a advanced availability service desk environment. So I'm going to kind of go through these steps a little bit, each of them at a sort of high level. And then Sebastian is going to actually demo for you the steps that you'll take to do maintenance. So, and again, you could find this in the guide, so you don't have to write any notes down or anything. So the first thing that you would do is step A, and that's verify the considerations. And by that, I'll start by saying that the failover process really normally takes seconds to complete, so the impact is very minimal. During that time, the considerations that you need to look at are that new users will not be able to log in, and again, it's seconds we're talking about. And for users that are already logged in, certain functions may not work, and those will include attachment functionality, knowledge search, knowledge indexing, inbound email, known as mail leader, and the firing of SLA events that are due to trigger. And a side note here as well, if you have a third-party tool which enables the auto failover of service desk servers, you have to disable that as well before starting rolling maintenance. And Raghu will talk a little bit further about that later on in the presentation here. So step B is that you would stop the standby server, and again, you could do that from the command line or the services console, as Sebastian demonstrated earlier. Either way is totally fine. You would then perform the rolling maintenance on that standby server, use Apply PTF to apply any service desk specific patches or fixes, do any options manager changes, anything like that, apply any other updates that are applicable for that maintenance plan, OS updates, so on and so forth. Then you would go ahead and suppress version control of the standby server and between the standby server and the background server. And what that will do is that will ensure that the standby server does not have any files overwritten by older files from a background server. So in other words, we're not pushing older files on top of new files that you've put in place with the patch. So we prevent that by suppressing version control. Then when you're done, you would go ahead and once version control is stopped, you go ahead and start the standby server back up. And again, from the command line or the services console, either way is fine. You can go ahead and then promote that standby server to be the new background server. And once you do that, the original background server will now automatically stop. And there's a command that you run to do that promotion, the standby to the background server. Then you can go ahead and perform the same maintenance on the old background server, the original background server, and again, using Apply PTF to apply any patches, any other OS updates, etc., are totally fine at that point. Then you can go ahead and start the old background server back up, and it will start as a standby server because there already is an active background server. If you remember, if you look at step F here, we've promoted the standby to be the new background, so the original background is no longer running. So when you start it back up, it's going to start up as a secondary because there is an active background at that point. If you desire, you can go ahead and promote that original background server back to being the active background server, and then start the standby server, which will bring you back into the original configuration that you had. So now we'll talk a little bit about performing maintenance on other standby servers. So that would be the next step here. So if you have multiple standbys, you would go ahead and perform those same steps on each standby server. And then you could start those back up. Then what you need to do is do the application server. So the first thing you want to do when doing the application server is, as these affect the users, you would start with the least active application server to start with, and execute the command to quiesce that server in preparation for maintenance. That will alert the users, as you saw before. That will alert the users that it will be going down for maintenance. You can go ahead and remove that server from the load balancer rotation if you're using that type of architecture. And you can use Apply PTF to apply patches and any other OS updates, etc., that need to be done to the machine. Then you can start it back up again and put it back in the load balancer rotation. You go ahead and repeat those steps on all the other application servers at that time. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Sebastian, who's going to show you a demo of the steps that I just went through here. So I will give her control back here.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to share it now. I'm going to share out my system again. All right. So for this demo, I'm going to show you how to apply a patch in advanced availability depending on the instructions given in the patch notes. So I chose a patch which gives us newer version of Web Engine. This patch does require a recycle of services. So at this point, I'm going to go to the standby server. Again, the environment I have background, standby, application. So I'm going to go to the standby server, and I will stop the services. Okay, and once it is stopped, I will apply the patch to the server, then suppress version control between standby and the background server. Always remember, before you apply a patch, read the patch notes provided in the patch. Some patches do need recycle of services and some don't. So this way you'll be better prepared. Also, there might be post-installation steps that you might want to follow, not might want to, you should be following in the README file, patch README file. Service has been stopped. Now I'm going to apply the patch. Okay. Patch has been applied. Okay, now since the patch has been applied, I am going to suppress the version control. So the command is the same PDM server control command, but with a -V flag. Okay. Now I will start the standby service. Okay. In regards to suppressing version control, as Paul showed you before, you can go to the server secondary custom ver file. It's located in the site mods directory. What version control does is basically distributes the files, for example, HTML mods, and different files to whatever is configured in the server secondary custom ver file upon startup of the secondary. So once we, or the application that you're running version control on, it will pull the updated files from the background server and distribute it to all the servers. Now the service has been started. Now I will take control of the background server because I do need to patch the background server. So I'm going to issue the same command to take over the background server. Sorry about that. So at this point, we're promoting standby to the background server, and we will apply the patch on the background server. So let's make sure the services have been stopped here in the original background server. Okay, they are stopped. Now I will apply the patch. Okay, fine. Now I'll start up the services again. Okay, while it's starting. While the services are starting, I'd like to just share a few best practices when trying to apply patch. Make sure you have a test environment that is similar to production environment. Plan and schedule the selected patches that you'd like to apply. Verify after the patch has been applied. Verify the patch has been applied by going to your history file or looking at the date and stamp of the file that is provided in the patch against your installation. If patch has not fixed the problem, then definitely compare the customized environment against the out-of-the-box. So the way you do it is basically you rename the site mods. Now I'd like to, let's see. At this point, now since this original background server, I have applied the patches, I've started the services. Now at this point, you should be able to perform the rolling maintenance on all the other standby servers that you have and start the services on them. Now, since I only have one standby, I'm basically going to take back the control, so basically put back the background server to its original state. Okay. So once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and start the standby server, which is in its original state back again. Okay, as I was saying before, you can the news about patches can be seen in our community, communities.ca.com. I'd like to quickly show you while the service is starting. You can go to CA Communities and support pages and check the news there. So here we're going to the support pages. Let's go to support, product pages, and let's select our product. Okay. Here you can see the links. These are the news announcements of new patches. You can click into those links to see what are the patches that have been fixed and a lot more information. Now I can see my standby service has been started. So now I'm going to apply patch on my application server. Now, as I showed you in the demo before, that for application server we can issue the same command as the QS command that I gave before with the 30 seconds interval, the same command you can give for patching as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I started so within the application server, let's give server control -Q30. Okay, while it's stopping, the page I showed you before about the communities, you can actually see the cumulative incidents as well. It's a pretty good website to go through. It's quite helpful. Most of the content of the website is to help you better plan and prepare before applying the patches. Now let's go ahead and look at the service. Okay, it's still stopping. Now, within the README patch, you will see that there are prereqs and correcs. Now, the Apply PTF tool does a very good job of erroring out if there's a prereq that's not applied. But if there is a correc that's required, you'll just see a warning. Now, it's depending on you to go ahead and apply the correc. So again, it comes back to preparation, reading the README patch notes before you apply any patch. So now the service has been stopped. I will apply, sorry about that, my Apply PTF. Let's go ahead and apply the patch that I applied on the background and the standby. It requires the recycle. Okay, let me just start up the service quickly. Okay. While that's starting up, just wanted to go over the cumulative patches that are basically coming out for 12.9 as well. But every patch, every cumulative patch has post-installation steps. Most of them, they have an important note which might say step 1 through 4 are required. Please don't skip them or postpone them. Right after you apply the patch, please follow those steps. And just as a note, Applied PTF never copies the files into site mods. That's where all your customizations are. So definitely, if you have a custom file which appears in the list of files or updated routine in the patch notes, definitely check that. And of course, determine the differences and what customization you need to keep. Later, you can just merge those customizations. Okay, the service has been started. So now, at this point, the users can log back into this, and you can QS the other application servers. So all the application servers can be patched and be ready to go. Now, this concludes my demo on rolling maintenance and patching. Now I'd like to pass the mic to Alex Peretti to learn more about unplanned outages. All right, here you go, Alex.
All right, thank you. All right, so the first 2 use cases were provided, kind of gave examples of rolling maintenance, applying patches, doing customizations, you know, kind of taking control of bringing your environment down in segments and so that the whole environment is never fully down. But unfortunately, there are some times where you may have an unplanned outage. It could be a hardware problem, could be operating system, could even be application, problem could be anywhere. But sometimes it just comes times when there's an outage and you need to know how to handle it and how to prepare for that. So thankfully, Advanced Availability does have some features that help with outage problems. So kind of give an overview of the points we're going to discuss. First, the main objective is to restore service as quickly as possible with minimal impact. And also we're going to discuss some options for monitoring the health of the service desk servers in the environment and some tools that we provide to be able to do that. So just to kind of give you some information on what behaviors you might expect with an outage. So first of all, with the background server. So let's say you're running your environment and the background server suddenly goes out, just completely goes down. Application servers are still up and operational, but the background is just lost. The expected behavior is new users would be unable to log into the application servers. Now, we did mention earlier in the presentation that authentication is one of those singleton daemons that's running on the background server. So, and new users would not be able to log in, but existing users would still be able to operate within Service Desk if they were connected. There's also the additional singleton processes on the background server would also cease to function until the standby server was promoted to the background server or until the services were restored on the background server itself. So some examples, knowledge search indexing would not function during a background outage. Mail eater wouldn't function. SLA, prediction and time management, attachments. If using the repository, if using the default repository settings. By default, the repositories are pointing to background server. However, that can be reconfigured to point to an application server. But assuming you're using the default, that would mean if the background server were having an outage, attachments would be temporarily unavailable. And also that you may get prompted with a delayed server response form or some generic delays. For a large portion of the tasks that the users already logged into the application servers, they should be able to complete without a problem, but there may be some instances of messages and warnings. Now, an outage on the application server is usually specific to a single application server in most instances. Barring some catastrophe, usually single application server, if that is having a problem, that's where the problem will be isolated to. So only the users directly attached to the application server will be affected. If the repository, the attachment repository, if you did configure it to point to an application server, one important thing to note is that it will not be accessible. With the default configuration, it's just pointing to background server. So that means no matter which server is the background, whether it's a background or a standby server that was promoted to background, attachments will function. But when you point the repository directly to a specific application server, if that application server goes down, attachments are going to go down until the application server is restored. Also, the application server should be removed from the load balancer pool. This is assuming that you have a single URL that all the users are accessing through a load balancer pool. And existing users would need to log into a different application server. So if you have users accessing the pool, then they would just need to usually relaunch the browser, and the load balancer would direct them to one of the active servers. But if for some reason your users are accessing the server directly through the server's name, they would need to be aware that they need to access a different application server's name, which is usually why it's a good idea to use a load balancer and have that handle everything, but it's not a requirement by any means. It just kind of helps things out a little bit. So we're going to discuss a couple things related to the failover. Now, main suggestion is standby servers should always be running in a wait state. This allows for reducing the time frame to promote to the background server. There's absolutely no requirement that a standby server needs to always be running. There's no checks and balances to require this to happen. But the benefit in having it always running is that if there is a problem with the background server, you could very quickly, within seconds, promote the standby server into the background. If the standby server is not running, then you need to start services on it, and it's just an additional delay. And also the other benefit is always maintaining a constant synchronization. So that's why the failover can happen within seconds, because it's constantly synchronizing. Sebastian showed the PDM server control -B command, and you would use the same command if you wanted to promote a standby server and make it into a background during an outage. You would just issue that command, and then the standby server would within a couple of seconds, take control. It's a very quick failover, as you saw in the demo presentation. If the standby server isn't running and you run the PDM server control -B command, it actually starts the services on the standby server. And then you need to actually issue the command again to actually perform the failover. But once the standby server is promoted, it then takes control of all the singleton process, and system functionality be completely restored. So, if you were using Mail Eater a lot, during that time frame when there was no background, Mail Eater would not work. But then once the standby is promoted, the singleton takes over, and then system functionality should be back to normal. We're going to discuss a couple of other things related to the monitoring, how you can monitor the health. And we do provide a health servlet, which is very useful for keeping track on the health of your environment. And there's two components in the health servlet. The first is the get health. Now, the get health, for the whole servlet in general, you need to deploy a separate instance of Apache Tomcat on the server, the service desk server. This Tomcat needs to be completely separate from the service desk. So you can't deploy the servlet into your service desk Tomcat. The reason for this is you want to keep this separate so that even if the service desk Tomcat has a problem, this servlet will still continue to function. So we want to keep this completely outside the service desk into a separate Tomcat. It's not deployed by default. It's obvious that we're not deploying in a separate Tomcat by default either, so you need to actually install the Apache Tomcat, the separate instance, and then you can deploy it. It's provided in the samples directory in the Service Desk Manager install folder, and you could just copy the WAR file and deploy it into the Tomcat instance. You're going to want to deploy this onto all the Service Desk servers where you want to monitor the daemons. So typically you want to put this on the background of standby servers. You may want to monitor the application servers as well. You just basically deploy this anywhere that you want to. And I have here an example of the URL. It's just /health-servlet/get-health, and that'll give you the information. It gives you an OK or not OK message to determine if there's a problem. And since this is running in Tomcat, it's HTTP or HTTPS based. And with this URL, you can monitor. You could monitor it with an external tool. For example, here, NimSoft Snap. Or if you have another tool that you use for monitoring, you could certainly plug in this URL so it could see if it's an OK or not OK. Or you can just open up a web browser yourself and bring up and see if there's an OK or not OK message. And you could use some automated scripts as well if you want. Now, the main warning we want to give here is these URLs are not protected. So you want to use protect these URLs so that unauthorized access isn't happening. We certainly don't want everybody being able to view these URLs, and you'll probably see why in just a minute. The other part of the health servlet is the failover servlet. And this is similar to get-health. It runs in the same Tomcat instance, and the URL is health-servlet/failover servlet. But this URL, you could actually use it to promote a standby server to become a background server. So you don't actually have to log directly into a standby server to issue the PDM server control -B command. You could just bring up a web browser, access this URL, and the system will perform the failover for you. So I'm going to stress again the importance of making sure the URLs are protected here. I'm sure it's becoming clear. You don't want unauthorized access to this failover servlet URL. You don't want people to fail over your environment unless they're a systems administrator. So you make sure to protect those URLs. We're going to talk in just a minute or two on how to protect the URLs, but I just want to stress the importance of it. And kind of the way this all ties together is you can do an auto failover via the health servlet. Now, this functionality is not built into the application directly. It does require an additional monitoring automation tool. The tool can be configured to perform the task to trigger the failover URL based on the not OK. So the scenario we outline here is you have your external tool monitoring the get health servlet. It's checking the background of the standby. If everything looks good, it doesn't do anything. If it gives an OK, then system functionality is just going to continue to run. However, if your tool gets a not OK, then you could configure it to trigger the failover servlet and then on the standby server and then promote the standby server to become background automatically. So it does require some additional tools, but this is definitely something you can do to leverage the health servlets to reduce downtime even further in your environment. So we stress securing the health servlet. You could use basic, you can enable authentication for basic single sign-on. We have here the Apache Tomcat website on how to do that. You could restrict access by IP address to host name, deny everyone, SSL, of course. We have a tech doc here, TEC 611801. This is a tech doc that provides information on how to secure your health servlet. And once again, I cannot stress enough the importance of doing this. So today, for our final demo, I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Raghu. He's going to give you some more information, show you a demo of the servlets in action. So, Raghu, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Just trying to get my desktop shared as well right now. Let me know once you can see it okay.
Great.
All right. We're looking good, Raghu.
Okay. The demo, as Paul mentioned earlier, it still has one background server, one standby server, and one application server right now. The same process would apply to other servers if you were to have any. As Alex mentioned, the health servlet is something that is not installed out of the box for you. So you would just end up installing another instance of Tomcat by downloading it from Apache website, or you could use another application server too, Tomcat being the preferred one. And let's say once you install Tomcat on a service desk server, again, the health servlet would only function on the server where service desk needs to be monitored. So if you would want to monitor the background server's health, you would deploy an instance of Tomcat onto that server in addition to whatever Tomcats you have as part of Service Desk, and then deploy the health servlet on top of that new Tomcat instance. So here, in this case, I got like a new Tomcat instance installed to program files, blah, blah, blah. And then there's really nothing in the web apps directory. And normally Tomcat, when you install it as a Windows service, you would get like a control panel like this. And right now the service is stopped. And the health servlet is something that we distribute in the Service Desk samples health servlet directory. And literally, all it takes is for you to copy that health servlet war file into the newly installed web apps directory of the new Tomcat and go start up Tomcat. And what it does is it deploys the health servlet for you, and it starts monitoring the server that it was installed over. It's not going to monitor remote servers. It will only monitor the local server. And you could definitely access it now using a browser, or you could have some custom scripts to access the same browser URL. And for example, as Alex pointed out in the slide, it would be the server name, the port number of the new Tomcat that you deployed to, followed by health servlet, where H and S are uppercase, and get health, which is with G and H as uppercase. You just go try accessing it with a browser, and I do get an authentication prompt here, and the only reason why I got an authentication prompt is because we configured our Tomcat instance, the new Tomcat that we installed, using basic Tomcat authentication. We just followed the steps in the document that Alex referred to in the last slide, and that let us configure and secure the Tomcat instance so that anyone would not just go to the URL without providing a password and a username. And the servlet literally returns a couple of items. It just returns an all okay if everything is working, or not okay if it's not running correctly. And it also identifies the role of the advanced availability mode, the server that you're trying to do the health check in. Right now it is the background server. If I were to do the same check against my standby server, I just got it bookmarked here just in case you didn't notice. The URL did change there. That's my standby server. And I still got an OK here from a status aspect, while the server role indicated as standby. And application servers go the same way too. Just provide the URL and you get that component too. And the way in which it's determining what modules are up and running and which server is via an XML file, which can be configured. It is in the classes directory of health servlet web-inf. There's an XML file called health.xml. If you want to monitor some specific daemons for background server, if you want to remove some, of course you can customize it. Just make sure the changes persist over when you apply patches or when you upgrade later on. You just need to restart the new Tomcat instance, of course. That's literally the simplest way of verifying the health of Service Desk, just going to a browser and getting the written code from the health servlet URL. What I'll do is something that usually is not done on a production box, but again, we are just simulating an outage, and I'm going to just kill one of the key components of Service Desk. And let me go verify the status of service desk on that machine right now. So I'm going to go back to my background server, and there you go. It's literally determined within a few seconds, as you saw, that the status is not okay. Given that we are testing this over a browser, sometimes you may get cached data depending on how your browser is configured. So if you're not seeing the correct result, you could actually delete the browser cache and then repeat the use case again just to make sure. But the health servlet already found out that my background server is not okay because we just created an outage. But my standby server is still okay. So guess what? We could actually initiate a failover of a standby server to take over the role of the background server, the older background server that is, or the original background server. So if I were to take a look at my service desk programs on the background, on the original standby server, you can see that a couple of key components are getting started now, and pretty soon, if I were to do a check on my standby server's health again, previously when I accessed the standby server, it showed me the role as SP, but right now it just shows the role as BG because the standby server took over the role of the background. So what we just did is literally promoted the standby server, the original standby server, to be our current background server. And unless you secure the Tomcat instance where the servlet is running, this could be abused really easily. And that's the reason why we were trying to make sure that the point is driven that when the health servlet is deployed, that access is only given to needed administrators or specific host names too. That way, not anyone would be able to run these health checks or failover servlets directly. And the test that we did is through a browser. So the exact same scenario could be, of course, thrown across by a monitoring tool like NIMSoft Snap, for example. You can configure it to get this URL and determine if a service desk server is healthy or not, and then do post operations like calling the failover servlet based on the status that it obtained from the health check. So, of course, that monitoring is not automated. We don't provide the tool as part of service desk. It's something that you would have to configure externally. Otherwise, they could be other plain scripts. You could even call like a Perl script to obtain the status of the servers by using wget. So a lot of automation can be put in place. But security is something that needs to be enforced on the Tomcat install. That pretty much concludes my demonstration for use case 3. Let me hand this back to Paul, who will take over the rest of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Raghu, and thanks everybody who presented content and did the demos. Great job. So just to recap, so in a little over an hour, we just went over the following topics. So Al did a brief refresher on what is advanced availability. He showed you how the topology looks as compared to a conventional architecture. He also addressed the new terms that are commonly used within advanced availability, things like background server, standby server, application server, quiesce, and so on. And then we also talked about singleton processes, right? So what are those processes, what do they mean, and how does it affect your advanced availability architecture? We then went into 3 specific use cases or scenarios as to how advanced availability works within some common scenarios that service desk administrators would face on a regular basis. So we talked about modifications, both schema and form modifications. We talked about rolling maintenance, and that could include services patches or OS patches. And then finally, we wrap things up with showing how to recover from an unplanned outage. So basically, how do you deploy and use the health servlet and the failover servlets that we provide within 12.9 advanced availability. So my thanks to everyone who presented. Drew from our SWAT team was feverishly trying to reply to all the questions that came in through the Q&A manager. Rest assured that if we haven't responded to them yet, that they will be responded to. A recording for this session will be made available on the community site along with a copy of the presentation and a copy of the Q&A session as well. So once all that is available, we'll post that all up to the community website. So now I will ask Kayla, our operator, to start the live Q&A session. So if there's a question you'd like to ask live that hasn't been already asked during the session, Kayla will provide instructions on how to do that. Kayla?
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that is star 1. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And there are no questions on the phone lines.
All right, so if there's no questions on the phone, then I'm going to ask a question. Does anybody on the line have any feedback regarding the content presented and or any future topics that you'd like some of these sessions to contain? Do we have anybody on the line yet or no?
No.
No? Okay. I guess we must have done such a great job in explaining everything that everyone, no one has any questions. So with that then, I guess what we'll do is we'll wrap things up. Thanks again everyone for joining. And again, keep a lookout on the community website for a posting of the recording, the presentation, and the Q&A session as well. So Kayla, at this time, I think we can end the session here.
No problem. This is the end of today's call. You may now disconnect.
Hey, Kayla.
Yes, sir.
Do we have the presenters only on the call right now, or?
I was actually instructed that there is no post-conference.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.